So hi, everybody. How are you? I'm just going to share my screen with you all because we are going to talk about intrinsic motivation and self-determination in education at Summerhill. So I am super excited. To be here, and I am super excited to see you all. Feel free to be really, really comfortable. I'm really good at multitasking, so feel free to ask questions in chat. And I really want us to discuss, right? So I'll do a presentation. It should last about probably 30 minutes or so. If we go a little longer, we go a little longer. And then there's time for Q&A. So really, truly have fun. Think of all the questions you want, and we'll have time both for verbal Q&A as well as if you want to put it in the chat. So happy Summerhill Festival. My name is Dr. Gina Riley. I am a clinical professor and program leader of adolescent special education at CUNY Hunter College in New York City. For most of my academic life, I have studied intrinsic motivation in education, particularly focusing on self-determination theory and cognitive evaluation theory. And I'm also probably best known for my work on homeschooling and unschooling and other self-directed learning models, including democratic schooling. I have a bunch of research articles out for those who know me, and 2 books. And the first one is Unschooling, Exploring Learning Beyond the Classroom, which was published by Palgrave Macmillan in 2020, as well as the Homeschooling Starter Guide, published by Rockridge Press in 2021. So that's a little about me. You also have to know that I have a professional interest in self-directed learning and democratic schooling, as well as a personal interest. I unschooled my son from birth to college. And if Summerhill was in the United States, we would have probably chosen Summerhill. So again, so happy to be here, so thrilled to speak. So the presentation itself is going to be very research-based. Edward Dietschy and Richard Ryan at the University of Rochester are the 2 theorists who I study and work with most. And I love their definition of intrinsic motivation, right? So intrinsic motivation is an innate concept. It's an energy orientation and a display of the positive attributes of humanity. And this includes curiosity and vitality and self-determination. And so, of course, intrinsic motivation is the opposite of extrinsic motivation. And when I talk about intrinsic motivation, I'm talking about it through the theoretical framework of Dietschy and Ryan's self-determination theory. But you'll see I've scattered A.S. Neal quotes and Zoe Redhead quotes throughout the presentation, because so much of self-determination theory is so very, very based on the work of Neal and others. So my favorite quote centers on that focus of intrinsic motivation characterized by curiosity and interest, right? So this is when kids and teens and adults engage in active and willing acquisition and integration of knowledge. This is knowledge from the heart, right? When individuals are intrinsically motivated, all of their motivation to learn and to grow comes from the heart. We'll talk a ton about love and heart-based learning within this presentation, because I see intrinsic motivation as one in the same. When you love something, you want to learn more about it. And so the benefit of intrinsic motivation is that it creates a different environment for learning. Instead of learning because they have to, children learn because they want to. And Summerhill is one of the best, the absolute best examples of this I know. So when we're talking about self-determination is a theory, and it really focuses on the definition of intrinsic motivation. But one of my favorite parts of self-determination, which we'll focus on as well, is called cognitive evaluation theory. It's a sub-theory. And the sub-theory focuses on the environmental tenets that facilitate intrinsic motivation in learning. And so as we're going through these, I want you to think of Summerhill. I want you to think of this form of education and the benefits of this form of education. And I want you to think of how this form of education really is facilitated by these three things, which we'll talk about in depth. And the first thing is a sense of competence. The second thing is a sense of relatedness. And the third thing is the sense of autonomy. So we're going to focus on these three things. And again, if you are thinking of Summerhill, think about all the different ways in which Summerhill focuses on competence, autonomy, and relatedness, and how that brings intrinsic motivation into learners and the facilitators and everyone involved. So cognitive evaluation theory is a really important part of self-determination. We can't force intrinsic motivation in kids, as we all know. We can only facilitate them. And by facilitating an environment that promotes intrinsic motivation, this is where we win, right? This is what Neil did with Summerhill. He literally built a school that focused totally on students' intrinsic motivations. And this is so, so important and so essential. So let's take cognitive evaluation theory apart, because I think this is really, really important. So when we talk about the facilitation of intrinsic motivation, the first thing that is needed is a sense of competence. So competence comes from several things, right? It comes from success experiences. It comes from positive feelings about activities, and that fosters intrinsic motivation. And kids love having competence, right? When kids feel strong and confident in themselves, then they are better able to learn what they are intrinsically interested in. And you see this in young kids all the time, right? Think of infants and toddlers and how proud they are when they do something on their own, how proud they are when they figure out a puzzle, or when, as a child, they figure out a Rubik's Cube, or when they do something or they make something that they're really proud of. That competence is something we just want to grow. And I'll always say, praise, I'm not anti-praise, right? I'm the intrinsic motivation researcher that loves a good job. I'm the intrinsic motivation researcher that loves people saying, hey, you did that really well. But more, besides like just that cursory praise, I am a bigger fan of positive specific praise. And this looks like, oh my gosh, I can't believe you learned that song on the guitar all by yourself. Or, oh my gosh, how incredible that model of an airplane is, right? The more specific we are in our talking to children, our talking to teens, the more confident and competent they feel. So it's really important that we focus on the strengths of a child, the interests of the child, and really fulfilling a sense of competence in them. So it's all about those strengths and interests and talents. And we know that the more time exploring interests and talents equals greater competency and curiosity in that area. You have so many great thinkers that have come from Summerhill. You have so many creative people that have come from Summerhill. And this comes from this intensive time to really think, to explore talents, to learn. And it's all about that time and that space, which I think is absolutely incredible. Yeah, so I love Thomas's comment. So competence equals the pursuit of competence, but also the feeling of competence internally. If I feel like I am a competent person, then I can go out and I can figure out things myself, right? If I feel like I have confidence, then I am able to do the thing that challenges me. Intrinsically, which is huge. So yes, the pursuit of competence, but also that internal feeling of competence. And that to me is really important. And it's really important to facilitate that in kids. And yes, Thomas, I love it. And then with that competence, you begin to really see that happiness. And we'll talk, I mean, I could talk all day about happiness. And I think A.S. Neal was kind of like the first positive psychologist, right? Because he is pretty much the first one that said, listen, it's really important for kids not only to feel competent and intrinsically motivated, but also to feel happy in themselves, to feel happy in their learning. So that first thing is competence. He doesn't get enough credit. Yes, right? I'm looking at Kritika's comment. Yes, exactly. If I like something, but I'm not competent at it, it's going to be a struggle, right? But the thing is, if I like it enough and I am competent in it enough, then it also propels me to challenge. And that's really exciting, right? Like, you ever see a kid who learns the guitar and they learn the guitar and they're trying to learn the guitar and they're figuring it out. And then they get to like bar chords. Musicians will appreciate this. They get to the bar chords. And this is when like the calluses start to form on your fingers. And this is when it's like harder to play the guitar. And they get through it because they want to play those harder songs and they know that they can. So that's where competence is really important. I love this quote by Zoe. It's an amazing quote. She talks about who can define success, right? The only person that knows that they are successful is the person themselves. Summerhill produces people who feel in control of their lives and have the courage to follow their interests. And honestly, I mean, there are not many schools you can say that about. I love the point of, someone internally defining their own success. How much more successful would we be as people if we sat and defined our own success and what that looked like and not let external factors really go to that, right? Summerhill is such a great school because of this. Yes, so Christine makes a great point. Game-based learning is about reward, right? And yes, of course, right? When you get a reward, dopamine sort of like comes into play, but intrinsically you can feel that. So you can play a game and intrinsically really enjoy what you're doing and still get that rush of dopamine, like, yes, I love this, and have it be intrinsic. It doesn't always have to be because of a reward. And I think that's what we're trying to get here when we talk about kids learning. We're trying to get to a point where they are intrinsically motivated, not only to be competent, but to challenge themselves and feel that reward in and of themselves. And that's when you know you've gotten there. So we talk about competence and then we talk about autonomy. And according to Dici and Ryan, in order for intrinsic motivation to flourish, a sense of competence must also be accompanied by a sense of autonomy. And this is sense of choice, freedom, an opportunity for self-direction. And in there, I mean, I think this is really the key. I want to explore autonomy a lot. So we're talking about time to pursue one's interests, right? When you think of the Summerhill model, this is exactly what it is. Freedom and independence. And with time to pursue one's interest and freedom and independence, you can get to that point of ultimate challenge, right? A lot of people are a little bit fearful of democratic education because they feel like students will just do what they like and never learn to challenge themselves or go beyond what they like. And that is just not true. Individuals who are intrinsically motivated know how to cultivate that intrinsic motivation in themselves, thereby making them so much more successful, even when it comes to traditional measures of education. I love the description of autonomy as the best Saturday ever. right? When you think of today, I woke up, it is 7 o'clock Eastern time today in New York, and I woke up at 4 o'clock in the morning, so excited to do this and so excited to see you all. And I'm thinking this is going to be the best Saturday ever, and I am going to make it so, and it's going to start out great. We've got such amazing people, and it's going to end great. And this is where, right, like, our kids deserve the best Saturday ever every day. They really do. And how changed life will be when they get the best Saturday ever every day. And of course, not every minute is the best, but overall, the quality of the day is important. Right. I love that. So there's a comment. I love this comment, Kritika, and I'm sorry if I'm not pronouncing your name correctly. She says, I just realized that so many people who are super competent but not motivated, it may be because they don't have autonomy to do what they like. Yes, or they lack creative freedom. Yes, with autonomy comes that creative freedom. With autonomy comes that internal joy and happiness. And with autonomy comes competence, right? So the Summerhill model truly is one of the best examples of autonomy in education. I love the quote by Neil: free children are not easily influenced. The absence of fear accounts for this phenomena. Indeed, the absence of fear is the finest thing that can happen to a child. And I want to pause there, right? Because think of how much we would have done as adults if we were not afraid. And think of how much, if our kids felt a sense of competence and confidence, our kids can do if they are not afraid. That's really powerful, right? The absence of fear, the best ever Saturday, the power to shape and guide who you are and what you want to be, no matter what, no adult influence there. That's such a gift. That's a gift to a child right there, right? It's like you can be whoever you want. You're ultimately responsible for yourself, but you can be whoever you want to be. That's one of the most amazing gifts you can give your child. And yeah, right. So here we go. Again, you have to understand that for most of my life, I have a very interesting dichotomy here. Yes, I research self-determination and intrinsic motivation and homeschooling and unschooling. But for most of my life, I teach New York City public school teachers. So I'm never anti-school, right? I want to support my teachers because I love my teachers and I love the work they do and I honor the work they do. And so a lot of times I have to be really careful because I don't want to denounce anything. I don't want to denounce schooling or traditional schooling. I just want to say, hey, here's another way, and maybe traditional schooling can learn from that other way, right? So I think it's really important that, yeah, I think sometimes you're exactly right. I think that sometimes traditional schools instill fear, but don't mean to, right? I don't think it's intentional. But I think it's the way we live as adults. Think of as adults how we sometimes instill fear in our children. They fall and we go, oh my gosh, are you okay? Right? We do that, right? Instead of saying like, look at you getting back up again, right? It's a different tone. It's a different language. And so we have to be really careful and we have to be really focused on the concept of the free child, the child who has autonomy. Yes, and you're so right. I love these comments. Keep going, Kavita and Kritika. Very often adults pass on their fear to children. Yes. And I think what's amazing about facilitators at Summerhill, right, is because you're working from a certain philosophy that you especially believe in, there is none of that. There is, we want to support you in doing what you love, right? So yes, you can be there alone looking at the comments. Yes, you can climb that tree so high, right? And that's really important. I love that. I love that about, or yes, you can, right? The opposite of, oh, you can't ask that question. Yes, you can ask that question. In fact, you can ask any question that you're curious about. What a gift, right? What a gift if we stopped and paused and says, yes, you can do it. And I think by now you all see how having kids have this sense of autonomy brings about competence. So adults have a role in this. It's not like Summerhill doesn't have adults around. It's not like any democratic school doesn't have adults around. Adults have a role in this. They are sure to create opportunities for self-direction. And in turn, they're providing what research will call autonomy support, or support for the freedom and choice of children. And autonomy support is probably one of the greatest gifts you can give a kid, right? Autonomy support can be created by providing an environment that values personal freedom, meaningful choices, non-controlling language, and unconditional acceptance of one's interests and strengths. It is so hard to be an autonomy supportive adult, because as adults, we tend to want to control things. As adults, we tend to want to really watch over kids. But one of the best gifts you can ever give a child is a sense of autonomy support. It is not easy, Vanya. Yes, you are so, so true. I think this is so hard, right? I think autonomy support, and we'll talk about relatedness after, but unconditional relatedness is so hard. Test yourself. I sometimes do this. Take one day and really journal out, was I autonomy supportive to my kids? Whether you are a teacher or a parent, and see sort of where you feel more controlling or feel like you have to control versus where you feel that you did well in autonomy support. So yeah, this is such a good question. There's a question in the chat. How do you balance between shaping a motivated and emotionally healthy child and avoiding making them overconfident and egotistic? And I think that, yeah, I'll answer it later too, but I also want to say someone who's intrinsically motivated will never be overconfident or egotistic, because they know how to create challenge, and they know the feeling of challenge, and they know that things don't always come easy. In fact, when you give rewards, that's an easy way to develop an overconfident child, right? Like, hey, here's first prize for this. Here's a star for that. Here's a sticker for this. But when the opposite is facilitated, when intrinsic motivation is facilitated, things are a little bit different, because they know the feeling of going for a challenge and they know how hard it is, right? This is not like easy teaching or parenting. This is not easy facilitation. I'm looking at Christine's comment, and I think I want to spend a lot of time on it after. I'm so glad that your son had a goal, autonomy. That's so exciting. And I love that he found this love of learning through autonomy. I'm currently doing a study of unschooling students, which is very similar to democratic school, except in a sort of singular way, of unschoolers who have special needs. And one of the things I'm seeing through these results is that students with special needs who are able to have choice and autonomy in their lives, and who are able to feel a sense of competence, feel better about themselves, and feel better and do better both academically, socially, and emotionally. So this is really powerful stuff. Again, as an adult, see how you can provide that autonomy support. The third thing, the third tenet, right? You have competence, you have autonomy, and then you have a sense of relatedness. Listen, when kids feel a sense of security, when kids feel a sense of internal safety, they can do anything. I often call this, it's almost like if you know counseling or psychology and you know Carl Rogers and you know his unconditional positive regard. Relatedness is almost like unconditional positive regard, right? And when you have unconditional positive regard, this means that people accept you and love you when you do well. And it means that people accept and love you when you do poorly. And it means people accept and love you when you make mistakes and when you fail. And that's hard to do. But again, when you give that unconditional positive regard or relatedness, a student feels safe. An infant, a toddler, a child, they know that they are unconditionally loved, that they are unconditionally accepted, and that there is a sense of safety there. And again, if we're talking gift, these things are gifts. These are gifts we give our kids. So Dici and Ryan will state that relatedness is based upon interpersonal affiliation, care, and the sharing of experiences. And one of the things I love about democratic schools is that you have a facilitator and you have a student, and there is a sharing of experiences. Also, relatedness is not just like mom and dad, right? Or facilitator. Relatedness is to peers. There are individuals to which their peers provide that unconditional support, acceptance, and love. In fact, Peter Gray, Kevin Curry Knight, and I are just finished with a study of Hudson Valley Sudbury schoolers. It's in publication. Hopefully it will be published in the journal Other Education, which is one of the best journals in terms of alternative education. And in this study, the one thing that was that came out so much was the power of the peer, the relationship, and the importance of the relationship between peers that happened in a democratic school. The fact that they saw these individuals as really, really like their biggest autonomy supporters. That's powerful. So whether it's a parent, a teacher, whether it's a facilitator, whether it's a peer, relatedness is so important. So yes. So relatedness is about feeling related to others around you. It's more personal than feeling related to your work or your interests, but you can add that in, right? Because most of the individuals you feel related to generally share some of those interests. I love that though. So the journal I just mentioned was Other Education. It's published by Helen Lees. There are a couple of journals that really focus on self-directed learning in academia. The first one is the Journal of Unschooling and Alternative Learning that is published by Dr. Carlo Ricci at Nipissing University. And the other one is Other Education, and that's published by Dr. Helen Lees. Both amazing journals that give a lot to the community in terms of research with regards to unschooling and homeschooling, self-directed learning, Summerhill and democratic schooling. So there's the magic, you guys. It's competence, it's autonomy, and it's relatedness. That's the magic. That's the magic of intrinsic motivation. And turning to Neil, right, who has become one of my favorite people through reading him. I love this quote. We're talking about teachers. A good teacher doesn't draw out, he gives out. And what he gives out is love. And by love, I mean approval, or if you like, friendliness and good nature. The good teacher not only understands the child, he approves of the child. And that's Neil right there talking about the power of relatedness, the power of that unconditional approval, that unconditional autonomy support. And I love that he's one of the first intellectuals to mention the relationship between facilitation, teaching, and love. This is super, super good stuff. So relatedness also has a link to what I call cultural transmission and what many researchers call cultural transmission. And so within the Summerhill environment, much learning comes from cultural transmission, which is just the sharing of knowledge from one generation to the other. This is why it's important to have adults around you. This is why it's important to have individuals of all ages together. Because through that, there is cultural transmission that happens, and cultural transmission is the best kind of learning. It's born of attachment. It's intrinsically motivated. It's imparted through various forms of intelligence. This is like two individuals, right? Maybe one who knows more about cars and the other who knows nothing, teaching that one who doesn't know anything about how to change a tire because they want to and because they need to, right? So whether it's a mom teaching a son or a dad teaching a daughter how to change a tire, or a facilitator teaching a kid how to change a tire, that's cultural transmission. How to cook, how to proceed with skills of daily living, how to shape the day, how to time manage. These are all things we show our kids, whether they are our students or our children. We are constantly there linked to cultural transmission. And of course, this is why modeling is really important. This is why really just, being good ourselves so that we can really like teach those lessons to others. That's why that's important. So I love the concept of cultural transmission, and I think it happens so much within the democratic school environment. Oh, Christine, you're going to make me cry because my mother says this all the time. In the poem If by Rudyard Kipling, you are going to make me cry. He says, if you can keep your head when all about you are losing theirs and blaming it on you, right? To learn that you had experienced that relatedness as a child and to have been allowed to fail and receive unconditional approval, that's the gift, right? That's the relationship that you want with your kids. I love that. I love, love, love that. There's a new trend I've observed where things that were culturally transmitted when I was a child are now taught through special classes or school. Yes, all the time. Right? We are really utilizing cultural transmission in our schools. And I love that. That's so great. I was talking to a group of librarians the other day, and they were talking about the power of cultural transmission and how they could give a lot of learnings and teachings to their patrons and the people who come into their library. Right? How cool that form of learning is. It's always intrinsically motivated. It's always really, really given with enthusiasm and love. Awesome. So I hope, we talked a lot about theory through this presentation, but I mean, here's where A.S. Neal comes in, right? A.S. Neal was intrinsic motivation before it was defined. He was positive psychology before it was defined. He believes strongly that one's intrinsic interest in a topic or field of study should be the starting point for all learning. Because if something was intrinsically motivated, then it signified value and importance to the learner. I mean, this is Neal, right? This is not me. This is not Edward Dietschy and Ryan. This is not the positive psychologist that came after. This is A.S. Neal. He also felt that subject-based learning was important, but that a student's personal happiness was even more important. And if you're teaching in a public school right now, you know the importance and stress that social emotional learning is given in the curriculum right now, right? Because we've come through a pandemic and hopefully coming out of a pandemic. And now we're talking about social emotional learning and the power of that. I mean, A.S. Neal said this in the 30s, the 40s, the 50s, and the 60s, right? He said that, listen, personal happiness is important. If a kid is not happy, they're not going to be able to do any subject-based learning. When you talk about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? The fact that kids can't learn unless they feel safe and loved and physiologically, they have a bed, they have food, right on target, right? Kids need love and kids need to feel happy. And Summerhill is this school that creates this ultimate sense of autonomy where everyone's allowed to do what they want unless it encroaches on another person's health, safety, or freedom. And that's really powerful. That sense of choice is so powerful. This is living in an intrinsically motivated world. Summerhill is the model and picture of intrinsically motivated learning. And this is why, like, being here is so impactful, right? Being here is so impactful because you might be an educator, you might be a parent, you might be a teacher, you might be someone who works or lives in a Summerhill school. Intrinsic motivation is the future of education. He is centuries before his time. He's decades before his time, right? This is the future. And this is also a way to bring more happiness and joy and love into education, right? So intrinsically motivated self-directed learning is a way to live positively. And it comes from the words of Neal himself. My own criterion of success is the ability to work joyfully and live positively. And my gosh, I hope that mine is the same as his. Right? I hope I can get up every day. And I always say this, right? I'm a professor, I lead a program. And my gosh, if I don't get up every single day, being able to work joyfully and to live positively, then I need to leave where I am. And I love where I am deeply, right? But it's really important that we shape a life and that our students shape a life that's focused on that, the ability to live positively, to be joyful. And this is why when you're talking about kids with emotional behavioral disorders or kids who are really trying to explore their identity or kids who are just having a hard time, this is why democratic schools are so healing to them. Because it's the focus on joy and intrinsic motivation and positive living. That could change lives. That does change lives. And so the Summerhill magic, right, becomes intrinsically motivated learning, becomes a place where students feel competence, where students feel a sense of autonomy, where students feel a sense of relatedness. If anyone does intrinsic motivation the best, it's Summerhill, right? They're the model for the facilitation of this. So how lucky we are to be here, how lucky we are to have this gem of a school, how lucky we are to have Henry and Zoe to host this festival and to preserve its legacy, and how lucky we are to have models of schools like these to inform traditional public schools or to inform parents in the way they parent, right? We're really, really lucky to have that wisdom and that knowledge. So I do want to leave time for questions. I also want to say, feel free if you have questions on this. Again, this is a theory I've studied all my life. This is something that I really love talking about. Feel free to contact me. I am griley@huntersoe.org. I am Professor G. Riley on Twitter and the Unschooled Professor on Instagram. But stay, don't leave, because we're going to have a Q&A. And please feel free to unmute, or please feel free to ask any questions you might have in chat. And I'm going to go through chat right now. I love this chat, you guys. Yeah, I love the honesty and bluntness in him too. I think he's so great because of that. He's like my new, I'm such a fan. I do hope this is the future. Oh, Vanya, there are many teachers like me out there that dream with this and just can't find their place. I can keep going, but we shouldn't have to fight for a fair education. I wish there were more Sudburys and Summerhills for all of us who believe in it. Yes, I will tell you, Vanya, that again, I teach teachers in the New York City public schools, and it's, you know, it's a huge system. There's a lot of things going on in that system, but I hope that as well. And I hope that we can all find our place, even in big systems like that, where we can really facilitate intrinsic motivation. Yeah, so my contact, it's griley@huntersoe.org. I am Professor G. Riley on Twitter, and then the Unschooled Professor on Instagram. I hope, I don't know that. Katya can probably tell us this, but I don't know if the recording will be shared on a platform, but I hope so. And I really hope that our paths
Yes, we are sharing all the recordings on YouTube on the Summerhill Festival of Childhood YouTube channel later. When the festival is over, when we are able to just do anything else.
Amazing. Thank you. All right. So I've got Sabrina. Go for it, Sabrina.
Thank you so much for all your research. I'm curious, we have several parents now. We've got around 10 plus, some kids that are 10 plus and are starting to get concerned about how does this form of education delve into children being able to plug into the social economic world that they need to plug into. So I'm curious, I would love to get some hands-on data that I can share with our community about, you know, how have things been for people?
Yeah.
If you could speak to that.
Sure. So I can only speak to the research that I know. And again, I just came out of a study of a Sudbury school in New York, but I can speak to you. Peter Gray has written about a Sudbury school in Massachusetts, and there's research on outcomes in his work there. And that was in the 80s. I know he hopes to do sort of like a more current version of that. We were actually hoping that the Hudson Valley Sudbury School study would be a more current version of that, but it ended up actually being about the importance of peers in learning. That being said, Peter Gray and I in 2015 did a study of the outcomes of 75 individuals who were unschooled. And so there definitely is a relationship between unschooling and democratic schooling. It's basically very, very similar, right? And you know this. And I wanted to name that study, "The Kids Are All Right," right? Or even "The Kids Are Doing Amazing," right? We had students who were entrepreneurs. We had students in STEM fields. STEM fields, who knew, right? We had students who were in the professional realm. We had a very high percentage of students who graduated college and went on to advanced degrees. The kids are amazing. So that was a Riley and Gray study. It's in the journal Other Education. The year was 2015. The first study just did an overall, so like this is how unschoolers turned out. And then the second one focused on higher education and employment. So you can go look for them. You can also just email me and I can drop you those two studies.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yeah. And Bruno.
Yeah, first of all, thank you so much. And this makes me so happy and so sad at the same time, because I'm finishing my studies to be a primary classroom teacher, and I've never heard of any of the links and references you have written there. And I mean, of course, I have done it because of myself, but not because of being part of my studies. And I think this is such a big problem that we have to study much more Pavlov, Skinner, and all of these rather than these things. But yeah, thank you for bringing this up. I wanted to ask you, which definition of self-directed learning or self-directed education does resonate more with you? Because we've been discussing with some friends about exactly this, right? Like a definition, and there are many around there, but we are having troubles to maybe find something. So I wanted to ask, like, do you have one, or is there any definition by someone that really connects with you, or what do you, if you have any comment about it?
Yeah, so it's a big question, right? There are so many different definitions out there. I'm always going to be focused on the ones that really focus on interests and strengths and intrinsic motivations. In a 2013 study, again, I can only speak to the studies that I've done. Peter Gray and I did a grounded theory study on 232 unschooling families. It was actually the first large-scale study of unschooling families. In that study, that was published in the Journal of Unschooling and Alternative Learning. We defined unschooling, but I think actually that definition can be broadened to define all of self-directed education. The Alliance for Self-Directed Education also has a definition that's probably similar. So that's something to look up too. You know, I think as long as the definition focuses on intrinsic motivation, strengths, I think you're probably in good shape, right? I don't think you have to have a perfect definition. But when you're talking about self-direction, you're always talking about intrinsic motivation and students learning through their own intrinsically motivated interests.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much.
Yeah. All right. There's lots of questions in the chat. And while there's questions in the chat, feel free to raise your hand. So what is the role of the rich environment in my theories of intrinsic motivation? That's such a good question. So for me, a rich environment does not have to be rich monetarily. It does not have to be rich budget-wise, right? But it does have to contain, right, or facilitate a sense of competence, autonomy, and relatedness. I'll tell you a personal story, which I think is really interesting. When I unschooled my son, I was a young, poor, single mother. I literally had no money, like no money. And we had no money for a very long time. And when my son is 25 now, and recently I had a discussion, he said, "Mom, I had no idea we were poor. No idea." Like no idea, right? Because we were always at libraries. We were always at free days in museums. We were always exploring nature. I mean, talk about climbing trees. I'm thinking like we made our own Summerhill, but it was in New York, and it was right in a suburban backyard where I lived in the basement. Richness doesn't come from money. And I think that's really important, right? Yes, money helps a lot. So donate to Summerhill, right? Money helps a lot, but richness comes from the environment. And I think that's really important for all of us to remember. And that's why for me, that sense of competence, autonomy, and relatedness is so important. Okay, I'm going to Christine's. Yay, Christine, in teacher training. Yes, in your third year, it's going to be all about classroom management and you feel conflicted. You know, I love this. I love this so much, Christina. Now I'm going to look at you. Okay, now I see.
Yeah. I was just eating a toasty. That's why I turned my video off. But I've been listening and knitting away.
I love it.
Yeah. But yeah, it's for me, this is the hardest time because yeah, I've got 17-year-olds in college, and some of them are great, and some of them I can see want to do the right thing, but they're just not listened to, and the differences between them. This is the time to learn, but it's really hard to kind of not think, yeah, if only they could really choose to be there. Most of them are just there because they have to be.
Yeah. I think here I love this because I'm also in a situation where I teach New York City public school teachers. So I'm teaching those classroom management classes, and I'm teaching those very traditional education classes. And I never mention or hardly mention unschooling. I will mention Sudbury schooling. I will mention Summerhill schooling. I will mention free schooling because I think it's a model we can take in. What I will say is, yeah, it's such a dichotomy and there's such cognitive dissonance, right? Because here you are doing teacher training, you're in a very traditional classroom, a very traditional teacher education environment. And then here you are at the Summerhill Festival, right?
Yeah.
We're talking about intrinsic motivation. And what I will say is, if you're working with teens, keep having conversations with them, right? Part of classroom management is really looking at different ways to do things. In my head, I don't say classroom management anymore. I say creating like a space or a classroom culture. And we really I have to say, every morning, it's like my mantra, right? Every morning it's competence, autonomy, relatedness, intrinsic motivation, every single morning. And if I can do even a little bit, if I can give kids a little bit of freedom and choice in a traditional classroom, then I'm on my way. And that might look like choice assignments or choice books. You can talk about ways that, you have choice with regards to creation of rules or structures. You can run your traditional classroom like a democratic school if you'd like to, if you have that freedom. So I think we feel so stuck in our traditional.
I have an hour a week with these kids, and it's I think I'm getting to know them as much as anything else. But I think giving them choices is part of that, and it's some of it I can see that I'm in the wrong environment to be able to do all the things I'd like to be able to do. But I still think there's a lot I can learn from that environment. Definitely. Yeah.
And there's a lot you can bring, right? Think the opposite way too. Yes, there's a lot you can learn and bring into a Summerhill type environment. And there's also a lot we can learn from a Summerhill type environment and bring into the public schools.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that's going to be really incredible in the years to come.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's very inspiring.
Good. I'm glad. I mean, I'm so excited. I'm going to get Derry, and then we're going to go back to the questions in chat. Go for it, Derry. Oh, you're muted.
Oh, you missed all the Irish swear words.
I love it.
I try and find the mute button. I introduced Summerhill to a state school, and it is possible. I was lucky. You've got to pick the right environment. You've got to pick the right head teacher who's going to give you a bit of support. And then as soon as you get into the school and start working in a democratic way, you've got to try and make some friends with some colleagues so you're not just on your own. And as it begins to pay off, make some friends with some parents as well. If they try and approach you, welcome them. I was so lucky because the kids in my school had just failed a high stakes test at 11, and they were put in a place called a secondary modern school where about 90% of the kids went where there was very little chance of going to university. So once these kids turned on to learning again, I had such wonderful support from the parents. Anyway, I've written a book about it, and I'll put a link in the chat. It's half price this week, and even the money you do pay for it is going to the festival, not to me. A dozen copies have gone, which I'm pretty pleased about. Some people have had problems getting it from Smashwords, in which case it's available on Apple Books, Barnes & Noble, Kobo as well. I'm so sorry about the plug, but I just wanted to say it really is possible to take Summerhill into a state school as long as you're careful about how you do it. Watch what foxes do. They're a good animal to imitate.
I love it. I love it. Go get Derry's book. I'm going to go get it too. I promise. Really important, right? Like, yes, it can be done. And I'll also add, Derry, make friends with your administrators, right? Your administrators are not your enemies. They are probably people who have learned about A.S. Neal and Summerhill too. And they are probably people who, if you ease them in, will be open to this. So I think that that's important. I think a lot of us see like the one up, one down relationship between administrators and teachers. And I think we need to just equalize that relationship a little bit. So I'm going to go to, I love these comments about intrinsic motivation and education and people in teacher training. That's amazing. I'm going to go to Stefan. Hi, Stefan. So how do you know if something that appears to be intrinsically motivated is actually intrinsic? For example, in highly patriarchal societies, there are strong societal expectations around girls learning to cook, clean, and look after children. Yes, and therefore it's easy to believe that to become a successful woman, I must know how to cook, which can translate into a motivation to cook, which can also appear to be intrinsic motivation. That is such a great point, Stefan. I understand that completely. I have to be very careful because I am someone who can make, I had someone tell me once, Gina, you can make the sourest lemons and you could take it and you could create lemonade from it. And that's your like talent and that's your strength. And I'm like, oh, that's like a double-edged sword, right? Like, yeah, I can. You know, what is intrinsic is true to you. And sometimes, you know, cultural transmission means we do learn to cook and we do learn to clean and we do it well and we enjoy it. And as long as we are enjoying it, as long as we are loving it truly, then that's okay. I think it's up to us to figure out what we truly love versus what we love because of external circumstance, extrinsic reward, or external messaging. So for example, I truly love art, music, and theater. My parents were very traditional, wanted me to be a teacher, a doctor, a lawyer, right? So I try to do both. I really do. And I think I had a lot of external messaging and it has affected me a lot, which is, as you can see, why I am here talking about the power of intrinsic motivation. But I also, as a parent, have been able to switch that and have my son really live this very intrinsically motivated life where I've said to him, I do not care what you are or what you are as long as you are happy. I used to say, like, if you are a trash collector, I want you to be the best trash collector out there. I want you to love your job and I want you to do it because you love it. And if you are a doctor, I want you to be the best doctor because you love it and because you're happy with it. I don't care what you become. And I think when a child is raised with those expectations that you become what makes you happy, then the outcomes are so different and the outcomes are so healing. So I think that's really important. Internal blocks. Oh my gosh, Roshani, there are so many internal blocks when it comes to discovering interests, strengths, and motivations. And those internal blocks mostly come from other people, right? There are expectations that other people give us. That can be an internal block. An internal block might also be, I'm afraid to learn this because I'm afraid I won't be good, right? And so a lot of times we have to let go of the end result. And so this is where I guess all the great spiritual teachings really teach us to do that, right? They teach us to be happy in the day, to let go of the end result. And there's such a truth to that. We will be blocked if we are waiting for this perfect end result. But we won't be blocked if we can just go ahead and enjoy the process of what we are doing. And I think that's amazing. Janaya, go for it.
I have a conflict. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. With this, because then for me, it goes to the praising society. Because it's even if you might hear my cat. Sorry.
I love cats. That's perfect.
Yeah. So she's here. So even if I try to disconnect and there is these internal blocks, I'm feel trapped in a society that it only makes me develop my intrinsic motivation if I'm praised for it. It doesn't matter if it's positive praising or not. So I struggle with the theory because I don't really think that in the society we live, we have intrinsic motivation because we are always affected by something else. So can you talk a little bit about this? Because I really struggle with the idea of we having intrinsic motivation because I think it's utopic. We do not have it. That goes completely against freedom in my view. So can you just please discuss a bit?
Yeah, thank you. That's such a great comment. Here's what I'll say. We live in a society where we are completely extrinsically motivated most of the time. We wake up. How many of you wake up to an alarm clock? Ding, ding, wake you up. All right, that's an extrinsic motivator, right? You hear the bell and what happens? We listen to like an automatic bell, right? We wake up. When we go to work, we usually go to work to get paid. And getting paid is an extrinsic motivator, and we need to be paid because we need to pay our mortgage and our student loans and whatever else we have, right? And our food. So a lot of people say, is it healthy to raise a child in a totally intrinsically motivated environment? Because this is not what life is like. And I will say the opposite. Students who are raised in an intrinsically motivated environment, we who raise ourselves using a theory of intrinsic motivation, know that there are always going to be competing extrinsic motivators, right? Listen, I get paid to do my job, right? Don't tell my dean I would do it for free. I would go in every day. I would do my job for free. I love it that much. And I'm doing something very different, right? I'm teaching teachers here that are in traditional schools, but I do it because my intrinsic motivation is to change those things. And so if you have intrinsic motivation guiding and working with the extrinsic that society is, you're going to be fine. I mean, yes, can you live a completely intrinsically motivated life? I mean, you live a life of intrinsic motivation as much as you possibly can. And our students know this, right? Our kids know this. They know. Our Summerhill kids know this. There are things they have to do. Sometimes they have to do it. Right? But most of their day is surrounded by their intrinsic motivations or guided by them. So I think we have to balance that, right? There are some things we have to do. I don't want to do my laundry today. Guess what I'm doing after this, right? But there are also some things that create sort of this driving force. If I do my laundry, I have clean clothes and therefore.
And basically totally related to the environment.
Yeah. Yeah, that's why that facilitation of the environment, right? It's not enough to talk about intrinsic motivation. You have to talk about facilitating the environment.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm going down and feel free to raise your hand. Yay, buy Derry's book, Yay, support group for teachers, Bruno. You go do that, that's amazing. Go for that. Check that out. I love perfect or perfect. Cats are both. All right. So are there any other questions? Yeah, Charlie.
Hello, everybody.
Hi.
Thank you very much, Gina. It has been really interesting. I have been in the background. I'm saying hello from Tallinn, Estonia. I'm a Colombian fella. I see so many faces that I know already, and we are very happy to be collaborating on this. I'm talking as the head of studies of a democratic branch within a public school. We have been for 2 years, this is our third, working towards implementing more of democratic principles, self-directed learning, the community process in decision-making. And we still have big challenges in relation, especially to something we call the school hangover. Kids who come from another conventional school and come with all these habits or thoughts or self-esteem really low and so on. My question is, I know that there are several, or we have spoken about it with Derry, at least that there are several or some schools within schools. Have you had any contact with those, especially in the area of Boston? Please, Derry, correct me. And if you have had any contact with those, what is the conclusion? What are the challenges that you have foreseen? And really interesting to listen to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So Derry could probably give me examples, and I think I know what he's going to say, but I'm going to ask Derry afterward. I will say, Charlie, that for kids with school hangovers, and this can go for toddlers and kids and teens, there's a concept in unschooling that has been talked about a lot called deschooling. And deschooling is where you're coming from a traditional environment where you are told to do a lot of things and where you are rewarded for things, and you are going into a more democratic environment or an unschooling environment. And so through the process of deschooling sometimes looks like being tired, right? Deschooling sometimes looks like just vegging out. But after a period of deschooling comes a period of increased creativity and a period of increased drive and interest. So I think that the deschooling process is really interesting to study. It's one of the things I have in my, my study list, because, you know, there's no such thing, and I truly believe this, there's no such thing as laziness, ever, right? We are born, we are humans. There is no such thing as laziness. When we are lazy, we are tired. When we are lazy, our body needs to rest. When we are lazy, our body needs to process something, right? We are never just lying around to lie around. There's always a reason. And so I think that it's really important to embrace that period of transition, to embrace that period of deschooling and go from there. Derry, what schools were you thinking of?
Well, I was thinking of Cambridge and Scarsdale in the Boston area. There are several more. They came out of Lawrence Kohlberg's thinking about the idea of the just community school. And they're still there, I think. Jerry Mintz may know of more. But I think that, you know, I say to Charlie, I think what he's doing in Tallinn is incredibly important, because it's a foot in the door to get a school within the school. The other program that I'm pushing is that the 20% program, that at least one day a week in all schools should be available for the kids to follow their own interests. And that's catching on too. There's the 20 time movement in California. Several areas in England are now trying out the idea within subject periods of giving kids 20% of time. So that's the other thing, the 20% campaign, if you like, and the schools within schools campaign. Both, I think, can bring about change in big public schools.
Thank you, Derry. Amazing. All right. Any other questions from, yes. Yes, I see someone with their hand up. You can unmute. I don't have a name.
Yeah, you call me William.
Hi, William.
Hello. I'm the dad of our Summerhill student. So my daughter now is in Summerhill School, and she has been here for 1 year. In her primary school, she was in a traditional school, and she was asked too much to do homework and to prepare for the exams. She had no interest at end of in the last couple of years, no interest at all at studying, because she's not from her own internal motivation. It's all forced to meet the expectations of her teachers. The teachers want high scores, to succeed, to meet their, leaders' requirements. So I think my daughter was very much hurt. She got a very, badly, trauma, internal wound. So when there is something, when she feels something pressure, she will, very uncomfortable. So will be very uncomfortable. She doesn't want to be taught to learn anything, but he got a lot of internal motivation to learn a lot of things. She basically, she likes reading. She likes, thinking about, complicated things. She's good, basically she's good at the math, but she just hate pressure, hate exams. And now I think after 1 year, she still doesn't have, started to learn, the courses. It's just, to need a lot of fun, a lot of interest to compensate, the pressure she felt in the past. Do you have any suggestion for us to help her to, overcome her hurdles?
I love that, William. You picked the right place, right? I mean, how
Thank
amazing. You really did pick the right place. And I think you're right. Like we talked about it before, that deschooling, the fact that people need time to heal wounds, and good for you as a parent. My gosh, recognizing that and for giving her that time and space. So like, you just keep doing what you're doing, right? Because you're doing exactly, it seems like she's in a beautiful environment, and it seems like she's healing, and she's leading through her own intrinsic motivations and learning how to do that. And how lucky she is to have parents like you, how lucky she is to have Summerhill that allows her
thank you.
do that. Amazing. Yeah, so just keep the competence, autonomy, relatedness, just keep, having her really explore what she loves so that she can begin to love learning again.
Yes, thank you very much. We just think Summerhill is the best place in the world for her to recover, to heal from her trauma. So I just give her time. I don't want to give her any pressure. Just give her time to get her internal trauma to be healed naturally. So that's what I think.
I think you did right. I think you did right. And I think that's beautiful. And Katya, what a beautiful testament to Summerhill. That's amazing.
Yes.
I love it. Thank you, William. Thank you for sharing that, because I think it's one thing to hear from like me, and it's another thing to hear from a parent who's experienced this type.
Thank you for the confirmation. Thank you for the encouragement. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Okay. Yes. Deschooling. Oh, someone mentioned Gatto. So if you haven't read Gatto, he's really interesting. John Taylor Gatto. Boredom. We could do a whole thing on boredom. Yes. Boredom is really important. It's really important for kids to know what boredom feels like and to be bored, because when you are bored, that is when you decide, after hours of being bored, hey, I need to do something, or what should I do next? Right? I always say, like, after a cloud, and this is positive psychology, but it's true, after a cloud comes a rainbow. After a period of laziness or boredom comes immense creativity. So do not be afraid when your kids are bored. Do not be afraid when your kids are, feeling lazy or unmotivated. Again, it just means that they need time to rest and process. And the processing is also something that we need to learn for traditional schools, right? Traditional schools, we go from one period to another. We go very fast. There's a lot of quote unquote learning going on, but there's not a lot of processing going on. And I think the power of the Summerhill School, the power of intrinsically motivated learning, is that processing time is built into this, right? A student goes through their intrinsic motivations, they do what they love for a while, and then they might stop and eat lunch, or they might stop and play, or they might stop and do something else. And in that time, they're also processing. So I think that there's beauty and a secret in that processing. Yes to more choices, Inga, 100%. Learning. Oh, someone wants me to clarify the word learning. And I love that, Gabriel. To me, every minute is a learning experience. And I'm not glossing over that. Every single minute is learning. We learn every day. We learn when we sleep. We learn when we eat. We learn when we talk to others. We learn when we listen to others. So we don't have to do anything to learn, right? I think learning is an everyday act that we do every minute. I love that Tobias smiles when students say that they're bored. Yes, keep doing that, because that's the core of intrinsic motivation. And yes, deschooling can take a really long time. I love, Christine, I love your words. I love the word of a developmental learning journey, right? If you were to design a series of lessons, talking about intrinsic motivation to teens is not like something new. I think you can talk about the power of freedom, choice, and autonomy. I think that you can really discuss that in a classroom. And this is such a great discussion for teens, right? Because teens love hearing about this. And there are so many historical lessons that teach us about freedom, choice, and autonomy.
So have you got any good sources in that sense? Because, or, you know, obviously I'm going to look you up, obviously. I've just, there's something also that was about the 21st century skills, 7 skills of the me, we, why, will, wiggle, wobble, what if. And I was looking at, I've got to do a curriculum for methodology 3 for in my 3rd year. It's a big thing we have. And oh no, it's with 4. We have to design a whole kind of curriculum. And I really want to try and, rather than concentrate on just their language learning, concentrate on their behavior, on helping them, giving them skills that they're going to take on forever, because whatever they get in the exams, they probably forget 6 months later, if that, you know. And it is about the skills they learn, that flexibility. But it's yeah, this is, for me, it's much bigger than just teaching them English, you know.
It is. So in terms of, I would look up sdt.org. That's the self-determination theory website. There's a lot of lessons in there. There's a lot of stuff in my work. Also, Positive Psychology Center at the University of Pennsylvania has a lot of things on character strengths. And if you are looking to like increase competence in teens, and if you're looking for a tool to do that, I always recommend 2 things. The first one is the VIA Strengths-Based Survey at the University of Pennsylvania Psychology Center. And the next one is, there is a book published by Gallup called The Strengths Finder 2.0. There's a teen version of that book. And if you're looking for like curriculum-based ways to increase strengths in teenagers, those are 2 sort of curriculum-based resources that you can utilize. I love the Strengths Finder. I have my students do it. Okay.
Finder, yeah. Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah. So I know we only have 4 more minutes because I want to make room for the other speakers. So I'm just going to look at the chat. And if anyone else has a question, you tell me. Any idea how to resist pressure to justify interests? Yeah, don't. Don't justify it, right? There's no reason, right? The only reason to learn something is because you love it and you're interested in it. I don't think that it's healthy to say, oh, it's good you're learning this, right? That's really not, because then you're praising, right? Oh, it's good you're learning this. Then I automatically learn for someone else and not for me. So do not justify interests. You really just want to have kids learn and play. And that's why, again, Summerhill is such an important model, right? Kids are playing and they're learning. They are doing all the things that they want to do and they are learning, and it's the best sort of learning. Yeah, and I think Derry makes a great point, right? When we're talking to traditional teachers and we're talking about instituting things like choice, autonomy, and intrinsic motivation, you know, you want to push the needle a little bit, right? So if it's 30% of the time, great. And then next year it's 40% of the time. And the more we push the needle as traditional educators, the more administrators see how healthy it is. You know, we haven't talked about this, and we have 2 minutes, so I'm not going to dwell on it, but I will say that intrinsically motivated learning does make its way into traditional success, right? So it's not like those who are intrinsically motivated. I mean, those who are learning in an intrinsically motivated way tend to have higher test scores, tend to absorb things better later on. And I think that this is really important. I think that we think that everything has to be given to kids in terms of learning. And really, when kids give it to themselves, that's when they're really learning, that's when they're really growing, and that's when they're really thriving. So I'm going to pause for a second because I want to say thank you. You've been such a lovely, amazing audience. If you have questions, always feel free to contact me. I hope our paths cross again. And I hope you have an amazing time at the rest of the festival. Thank you, Summerhill. Thank you, everyone. Have a great, great day. Enjoy.